Welcome, Joe Jencks, to Madison Folk Music Society's Folk Voices series. It's great to see you today.
Thank you, Kai. It's great to be here. And it's always a joy working in any capacity with Mad Folk.
I appreciate that. And you have worked with Mad Folk quite a bit over the years, and you're one of our regular contributors to our newsletter. So thank you for that. We are talking now mid-January 2023, and we have a concert coming up at the end of February. And the reason I say we is you were kind enough to invite me to be your opener. So thank you for that. The concert, for those who are interested, is February 24th, 2023 at the North Street Cabaret, and it will start at 7 p.m. Joe, tell us a little bit about where you find yourself right now in your career as a touring singer-songwriter.
Well, I'm just coming up on 25 years on the road full time. And, pandemic notwithstanding, it's been an extraordinary journey thus far, a journey that has brought me into regular contact with people that were once sort of musical heroes of mine, but that I didn't have any, point of access to, except for, like I met Bill Staines the first time because I got to open a show for him through Swallow Hill in Denver, and then the next year through Mad Folk in Madison. And from those 2 years in a row opening shows for him early in my career, a friendship blossomed, and so I think right now I'm in a place of reflecting with extraordinary gratitude on the community of colleagues that I have come to build genuine friendships with, and looking at all of the places that I have been, and just taking account of that, from tours in the United States and Canada to Ireland to the Caribbean. I did a tour with the U.S. State Department as a cultural ambassador in the Caribbean. I've seen music become truly the passport that takes me out into the world. It's the vessel that I sail on the sea of humanity and explore. And I feel incredibly grateful for that. So I'd say where I'm at right now is a place of genuine gratitude. Music has become the through line in my life and the center point for so many different relationships with so many amazing communities that are geographically dispersed, but all of them to me are they're my village, they're my people.
Absolutely. Yes, I remember you and I met at the Shawano Folk Festival several years back. And for me, that meeting was transformational because I had not encountered up until that point someone who was singing with the kind of heartfelt passion about social justice, about love, the love between people and for communities, and spirituality in a way as well. And so when I heard you, and I don't know how I managed to not hear you before that, but when I heard you for the first time, I just felt a sense of kinship. So I'm glad that you brought up that music has connected you with so many different communities internationally. That's a good segue too to your latest album, which ties into one of your strongest international connections in Ireland.
Yeah, I'm a dual Irish U.S. citizen. And until 2007, this was a bit of an artifact of family history for me. My granddad immigrated in 1914 and retained his citizenship. And by Irish law, any child of an Irish citizen that has retained their citizenship, born on or off of Irish soil, is an Irish citizen. So I was, by Irish law, the child of an Irish citizen, my mother. But my mother never made it to Ireland in her lifetime. And so I had to provide some sort of family history and paperwork and submit that in the late 90s. And then I got a letter back from the Irish consulate in Chicago that said, we acknowledge that you are by Irish law an Irish citizen, and your name has been entered in the registry of foreign births. And I remember reading that and going, okay, cool. It's official. And then I sort of expected that maybe the next letter would be from the Irish Revenue Service saying, we have noted that you are an Irish citizen, pay up. And then I found out that writers and musical composers hold a unique tax-exempt status in Ireland up to a certain income threshold. And below that, you don't have to pay income tax because they recognize that culture is their single biggest export, and it's very difficult for artists to make a living only in Ireland. So artists have to work all over the world from Ireland in order to make a living. And in so doing, they continue to share bits and pieces in culture and history that matter to the Irish identity, both inside and outside of Ireland. So it's been a very interesting exploration for me. As a folk singer, I've never come anywhere near the threshold where I would need to pay taxes. And they also have reciprocal agreements. If you're paying taxes in your home country, even if you're an Irish citizen but resident somewhere else, then you don't get hit twice. So it's been a wonderful path of exploration for me, not just in institutional process, but truly in culture. I just think it's kind of funny that they figured out they were making so little money taxing artists, they quit taxing artists. It was costing them money for the process. But I've been really grateful to get to know Ireland differently for the last 15, 16 years. I've been traveling there regularly and making friends there and coming to understand the culture, not in the same way as if I had been raised within the Republic, but with a much deeper understanding than the average tourist would have. And it was part of my social commitment to let being an Irish citizen be something that was real for me, that wasn't just something I trotted out once a year in March, or if the Irish football team managed to be doing okay, that I really wanted it to mean something. So I subscribe online to various Irish news sources, and I make a point of staying up a little bit on what happens over there. But I also love Irish music, but I never released an album that was focused on Ireland or on the part of me that's Irish, because I never wanted to get pigeonholed as like, oh, he's a Celtic guy. And, some people would love that and other people not so much. So on my 17th album, a good prime number, my 17th release, some of them were EPs, a couple of singles in there, but it was my 17th release. I finally decided to do an album that was entirely dedicated to songs that I had written about Ireland or in Ireland, or songs that were written by friends and colleagues that spoke deeply to the themes I was exploring of identity and immigration and the diaspora and bits of history about Ireland that are often overlooked. So a song like When the Moon Rises Over Skibbereen that I wrote about the Great Hunger and Gorta Mór in the Irish language. It carries weight because in the Irish language, the Great Hunger isn't called a famine, it's called the Great Hunger. It acknowledges that there was food in Ireland, but the age-old problem of classism meant that the people who had food and the people who needed food had this disconnect between them. And there were people starving literally in a land of plenty. In one of the most fertile farming countries in the world, there were people starving to death because they didn't have access to food beyond what was failing. And so that's why it's called the Great Hunger. So I explore that a little bit in that song about Skibbereen, but I also cover a song like Luca Bloom's song City of Chicago, which is very dear to my heart. And I'm delighted that my life has turned in a way that Luca Bloom and I have become very collegial friends. And, my granddad ultimately settled in Chicago. And if you look at the northern suburbs of Chicago and where he settled, ultimately in Barrington out in the country and along the Fox River, which was nothing swanky at the time. It was just another town in northern Illinois, but that's where he settled. And it looks so much like where he grew up in County Kildare. The gentle flowing waters and the ponds and the gentle hills and the farmland and the pasture land. And, I the first time I went to his hometown, Athy in County Kildare, I was like, oh my God, like no wonder he settled where he did. It just looked like home to him. So this whole album, it's called The Coming of the Years, is really an exploration of that identity from who I am as a singer-songwriter, as an artist, as a writer in the present moment, looking at all of these pieces of identity and how they fit together as part of the composition of who I am, not as the only measure, but a notable part of it.
Thank you, Joe. That's so interesting to hear a little more in depth about how you thematically chose which songs to include in the album and how it goes so much farther beyond your love of Ireland, your identity as a dual Irish citizen, and digs deep into your identity now, where you find yourself rooted and growing as an artist and as a human being. That's lovely. Tell me a little bit about how you went to make this album.
This is the first album um, in a long time, probably since the mid 90s. This is the first album that I've made where I was primary engineer on the album. And I've always had a hand in recording my own records and recorded bits and pieces here and there. But I really, it's a gift to myself sometimes to go into a really nice, top end studio and let somebody else worry about the tech, and I just get to be the artist. Because if you're producing an album and being the artist at the same time, you're already losing a little objectivity on what you're creating. And when you're also lead engineer, now you're wearing three hats at the same time, and there's every potential for you to miss something, or to be really not quite in the zone about a thing. But I realized years ago that I did a minor in engineering when I was at conservatory. I have been doing live sound engineering and studio engineering for years in different contexts, just peripherally, not as a mainstay of anything I do, but it's a skill set that I have. And a dear friend of mine who's had a hand in every record that I've made since 2005, Charlie Pilzer at Tonal Park Studios in Tacoma Park, Maryland, said, you know how to do this. You shouldn't record in, dollar heavy places. Like, you should find a way to record and use the skill set and the knowledge that you have to accomplish everything that you can possibly do on your own, and then bring it to me to do the things that you don't have the gear for, don't have the space for, don't have the tools for, or don't have the knowledge for. But do everything that you can possibly do on your own, and then bring it to me, and we'll go from there. He said, I bet you shave $10,000 off the cost of every record you make.
Wow.
And
Yeah, that's the business side of what you
you
do.
know and I really appreciated that after a nearly 20-year professional relationship and friendship, that he was very clear with me that to him it felt a little conspicuous to keep taking money from me to do things that I could do for myself. And so he and I talked about the kind of gear that I wanted and what I would need to have one channel in my studio that was as pure and pristine as what I would get in his studio. And I tested out a lot of different microphones and preamps, and I really found the combination that was made for my voice and that gives me the sound that I was after. And then from there, the more layers you put in a mix, the less it matters how precise each layer is recorded. There are engineers out there who are rolling over and ready to throw spitballs at me for having said that, but it's true. I mean, there are, the more you stack a mix, the more imperfection you can bury in the mix, and most people will never know.
I'm curious what the artistic or experiential difference was for you working in a space you had created, built. I think we're seeing that space behind you right now.
Yeah, I'm in my studio.
Versus, yeah, congratulations. Versus going to, like you said, some top notch, maybe to Tonal Park and laying down tracks there. What was that experiential difference like? What's the good and maybe the bad out of that?
So let me start with the bad and end with the good on that. The bad is that in spite of my best effort at nailing down tempos, I go back and listen to the record now, and what I have evolved to on stage is different than what I recorded. Some songs feel just a little too fast. Most of them feel just a hair too slow for me. But you push and pull a rhythm in a song when you're performing it live. Even if your meter is pretty solid, you push and pull a little bit. When you're in the studio, you're trying to keep it metronomic in a very particular way because it's easier for session players to lock into that if you keep it pretty straight. So this has always been a challenge for me, and I didn't quite get the tempos, but I would try tempos 2 or 3 times a day on each song. I would, I'd see, how does this sound and feel to me at 10 in the morning versus 10 at night? I'm normally on stage somewhere between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. So how do these songs feel to me in the evening? That's a better measure of when I should be gauging my tempos. And I got it mostly right, except for a couple of songs. And I think it's better to go a little slower than too fast, because as a songwriter, I really want people to absorb the content. And if you go too fast, you just chug, chug, chug right past it, So that was one of the things that it would have been great to have another engineer or another producer in the process to just offer an objective opinion and say, this feels like it grooves to me better just a little faster or just a little slower. What was absolutely stunningly beautiful about making a record in my own studio is that I was not on the clock for the minutes that I spent or the hours that I spent. So I could chase a vocal performance to my own satisfaction. I could play something until I really played it the way I wanted to, and not be looking at the clock and not be anxious about what it was costing me to find my place of absolute zen as an artist inside the process of recording. And that was a joy. I gave myself 3.5 weeks, and I just lived in my basement most of the time. And it was a really beautiful thing. And I think for the first time in my career, I captured the right balance between live and studio feel in an album. I captured the aliveness of music in this record because there are little ticks, there are imperfections, there are places where it isn't studio perfect. But studio perfect is pop music. Studio perfect is ironed flat, where you have removed the energy from it. And there's a reason why so many of the great jazz albums are live sessions where the players get together in a studio for a couple of days. They play through a bunch of songs. They say, okay, well, there it is. The best of that becomes the album.
Oh, absolutely.
And I did that. There were a couple of songs that I initially imagined I would record. And once I was done recording and I'd listened to everything side by side, I went, I didn't quite get there on these two. We're done with those. This is the album. This is what fits together cohesively. And the joy of doing that, not on a clock, the joy of saying, I'm on retreat for the next 3.5 weeks. My retreat is making this record. It was just phenomenal. And with everything we take on, we get better at it if we're paying attention. And I am now a better producer, a better engineer, and I think a better artist for having had that very personal experience of creating the heart of this record. And then, of course, I traveled with it, and I went to Maine to catch Hans Araki to do whistles and flutes, and I went to Vermont to get Lissa Schneckenberger doing fiddle, and I went to upstate New York to get John Roberts doing concertina. He's truly one of the best in North America. And then I went to Tonal Park, then I went to Washington and mixed this record in Tacoma Park. And I was just so pleased with how it came out, because there was an artistic freedom for me in my primary performances because I was not on the clock. I mean, I was on a clock. I had a finite number of days that I could put into it, but I wasn't on the clock in the same way, and therefore I wasn't anxious about what it was costing me. I had already spent what it cost me. It cost me the gear. I was spending what it was going to cost me, which was time off the road.
That's true.
I wasn't anxious about it because there was no hidden cost. I had already paid for the time and the space and the equipment, and then I just got to play, and it was joyful.
Joyful, yes. Having made my album much the same way, because we both released an album this year, and I agree. I think that's the key, is the artistic freedom that comes from feeling like you have lower costs for any mistakes you make, because no matter what your creative field is, we have to be willing to go for it and make mistakes in order to produce our best performance. At least that's been my experience. So it sounds like you feel like you got there. You gave yourself that retreat experience. You gave yourself permission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A willingness to take risks, a willingness to try things out and go, I've always played this on the acoustic bouzouki, but I'm thinking I need to play this on the electric, or I've always played this on the guitar, but how does it sound on the electric bouzouki, and to play with tone and play with reverbs and to play with atmospheric things as well as the heart of the performance, in order to find what was in that moment the most sincere expression of what I had to give as a performer to what I had written in some cases years earlier as a writer. Because we have these different relationships. Part of our work is creating music, but there's another part that is learning how to perform that and merge our creative ideas with a tangible public expression of them. And so we have to learn our own music in the same way that we would have to learn a cover song, and figure out where the center of that performance is for us and where efficacy in performance lies. And there were some real delightful surprises for me in making this record and making The Coming of the Years, because I had the freedom to experiment and deconstruct my own preconceptions about what it was going to be, and figure out in that moment what I had to give. Because in any given moment as a performer making a record, it is at best a snapshot of our lives. It is not the definitive performance of a song. More than likely, we will give that on stage somewhere years down the road as the culmination of a different process of relationship with performing the song. But when we're recording the song, that's just a snapshot. That's what we had to give in that moment on that particular day. And I think it's really important to give ourselves permission as artists to make the art we're able to make in that moment, and not hold ourselves to the expectation that we forevermore have to do it exactly that way because that's how we recorded it. That's just what we did in that moment, in that heart space and head space. That's what we created. And as the song moves through us, as our lives grow and evolve and change, we come to understand our own work differently. Each year we have a different relationship with the things we have created, and also with songs that other people have created. I had occasion recently to sing Cat Stevens' song, Where Do the Children Play? And it just knocked my socks off how on point he was nearly 50 years ago, when Cat Stevens, many listeners would know him as Yusuf Islam. And he was so on point about the need for environmental justice and environmental awareness and the impact of human actions on the environment. But I don't think I received that song in my childhood in the same way that I do at 50. And I don't think society in general really are like, oh, one of those hippie things, And now people are like, oh, wait a minute, he's really asking this honest question. Where do the children play? When we've paved everything we can pave, when we've built everything that we can build, then where is it that human beings simply get to live and still be connected to the earth? And there's so many meta questions that are in that song that I think it's true with our own work. And I think this album, The Coming of the Years, really put me in a way of examining my own work and the work of my colleagues and friends in a different way. And because I wasn't on the clock, I got to deconstruct it and put it back together in a way that served the moment and the songs and what I had to give. I probably have more to give now than I did a year ago. And that's a beautiful thing. But there's imperfection in all art.
And lest we stress the imperfection to give people the wrong idea about the album, it is beautiful, and it has been highly acclaimed. And Joe, you're going to have to help me out here because I didn't do my homework well enough. And I know you probably don't feel comfortable bragging, so I'm going to ask you directly, what kind of radio play did you get out? What kind of awareness were you able to get through the folk music DJs with this new album?
I got a lot of radio play through the folk DJs. It was only because it depends on airplay, whether you end up as number one, number two, number three. It's based on how many spins you get in a given month, and having to do with certain ways that they regulate that. I had enough airplay to have a number one record, but they only count a certain number of spins from each DJ. After that, they trail it off. But the DJs who love this absolutely love this record. And it still came out as number 3 for the month. of August, in which I released it. And I was dealing with some ailments and illness over the summer, including COVID. And so I put a lot of energy into releasing this album, and then I sort of left it abandoned at the firehouse door, like an orphan, because I didn't have the energy to keep pushing. So I was very touched that it ended up as number 3, all things considered. And it continued to get heavy airplay through the fall and into the winter. But one of the things that was most delightful for me is that I got to release the album at the Goderich Celtic Roots Festival in Ontario, in Goderich, Ontario. And this was a gig that had been booked originally for 2020 and then 2021, and then finally happened in 2022. So that was a little bit of the motivation to get the record out by August 1st, because I knew that I had a big Celtic festival that I wanted to have this for. But to release this record to an audience that understood all of the different contemporary and historic reference points, musically, lyrically, in the album was just a complete joy. And I met the editor of Irish Music Magazine, published in Dublin. It is kind of the premier global communication vehicle for the Irish music community. And they just did a little feature on me for the January issue as one of their best of 2022.
Congratulations.
So
well, I'm looking forward to, and I'm sure those of you who might be listening to this after the concert, I'm sorry. You know, I even though it hasn't happened yet, I have a feeling that you've missed out on something wonderful.
JoeJencks.com.
You can find the album at joejencks.com, and you can also go out to joejencks.com and find another concert in your area to catch Joe live. I wanted to also touch base on something that you said. Those who loved the album loved it very well and played it quite a bit. And I have been enjoying listening to this album quite a bit as well. So
thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for all your hard work on this. And thank you again for the invitation to open.
I'm really looking forward to it. And we sing well together. And
I was just going to say, I forgot to tell people that you were gracious enough to provide a bouzouki arrangement and harmony arrangement for one of the songs on my album, Take Shelter in Love. And we'll be doing that live at the Mad Folk concert, and also in another concert in Milwaukee.
This is the thing I most missed during the height of the pandemic, is singing with other people in person, where you get the physical experience of voices in a space together, both with other singers on stage and with audiences that are there to listen but also participate. There's something in the communal experience of singing together that's just beautiful. So Mad Folk has always been an audience that loves to sing, and I'm sure there'll be some singing that evening. And I look forward to doing some singing with you as well, Kaia. And thank you for your work for Mad Folk and for the folk music community in Wisconsin and in Illinois. It's a beautiful thing, and it helps us all feel more connected, even when the world projects messages at us that are about keeping us separate and compartmentalized. Music is the place where we really get to express in very tangible ways that we are community. And it is my privilege, 25 years into my career, to still be working with Mad Folk on concerts. And shout out to Darlene Bueller, who's spent a long time keeping the wheels on the bus over there. So, and thank you for the work you do, and all the volunteers. No organization survives without, a small cadre of volunteers that really just keep it going. And I'm so grateful for everybody involved in Mad Folk.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Yes, it's a beautiful organization to get involved in. And since you mentioned volunteers, I'll just say to those of you on the website right now, you can learn how to be a volunteer by checking out the menu. And again, please visit joejencks.com. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Joe. And I look forward to seeing you in person shortly.
Likewise. Thanks.